Since we're concerned with philosophy here, I thought I would say a few things to answer the question, what is philosophy? I think the best way to understand philosophy is that philosophy is the study of questions not yet answered. For about 2,000 years, for example, philosophers argued about how motion worked. One of the questions was whether or not a vacuum existed, whether there can be empty space. Many argued that there is no empty space, but if there's no empty space, then how does something move? That is, if there's no empty space for something to move into. Another question comes from the observation that everything that you cause to move, say by throwing or pushing, eventually stops. Why does everything stop? Except the things in the sky, the planets and the stars. There were once philosophical questions, and philosophers gave a number of different answers. None of them seemed fully satisfactory. Then in 1687, a philosopher published a book, Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica. Translated from the Latin, the title means the principles of mathematics for natural philosophy. The field was called natural philosophy. This philosopher's name was Isaac Newton. Other philosophers looked at his work and said, yeah, I think he's got it. Or very close at any rate. So the field of physics was born, and philosophers handed those questions over to the physicists and turned their attention to other questions not yet answered. Oh, and there's a reason why the highest degree one can have in many fields of study is the PhD, the Doctorate of Philosophy. At that level of study, one is still pushing the boundaries of knowledge. Now, value theory is filled with questions not yet answered. People haven't settled on an answer yet to the question, what is it for something to be good or bad? So this subject remains in the field of philosophy. Now, it's not the case that the reasons why these questions haven't been answered is because they have no answer. This question has no answer is in itself an answer of sorts. What we're talking about here are questions that have answers. We just don't know what the answers are yet. The fact that we don't know what the answer is doesn't mean that there's nothing we can say on the subject, that all answers are equally good. Think of it as being like a murder mystery. You're trying to figure out who killed Mr. Body. You don't know who it is, but that doesn't mean that all 8 billion people are equally suspect. You can divide your suspects into 3 rough categories. Most people you can rule out. They couldn't have committed the murder. They live halfway around the world, and they're not in a position to travel. There's another group of people where you can say, yeah, well, maybe they could have committed the murder, but it's not likely. And then you have your prime suspects. You're pretty sure it's one of them, but which one and how did they do it? The evidence doesn't fully fit with any one of them. The same is true of philosophical questions. We can rule out a lot of answers. In other cases, there are possible answers, but they seem pretty unlikely. And there are the prime suspects, one of which is probably the correct answer, but we're still trying to find enough evidence for a conviction. So we go over the evidence again and try to figure it out. For example, when it comes to categorizing an action as morally obligatory or prohibited or permissible, philosophers have 3 prime suspects. Consequentialism. The right act is the act that will produce the best consequences. Deontology. The right act is the act that conforms to a system of natural rights and duties. Or virtue theory. The right act is the act that a virtuous person would perform in those circumstances. And there are a number of, well, it could be one of these, but it doesn't seem likely. Options here include egoism. The act is right if it benefits the person performing the action. Agent subjectivism. The act is right if the person performing the action judges it to be right. Cultural subjectivism. The act is right if the culture that one belongs to judges it to be right. Divine command theory. The act is right if it is the act that God commands one to do. And we can come up with a huge list of options that make no sense whatsoever and can be ruled out. For example, the act is right that brings about the greatest total number of paper clips in the universe. Or, the act is right if it is performed with the right hand. Or, flip a coin. Heads, the act is obligatory. Tails, the act is prohibited. And if the coin lands on edge, you're free to do whatever you want. Every year, there's a survey asking philosophers which views they endorse. Currently, about 30% of them support some form of consequentialism. About 30% of them consider themselves deontologists, and 30% are virtue theorists. The other 10% choose something else, though none of them, that I'm aware of, defend the paperclip theory. So philosophers keep poring over the old evidence and digging up new evidence to try to settle the question one way or another. This is not a field where one memorizes the correct answers and repeats them on the test. It's a field where one takes one's own look at the evidence to see if they might be able to draw their own conclusions. This is what you will find here. I'll present the evidence. You can look it over and decide for yourself what view you think the evidence supports. I have my own views on that, of course, so don't trust me entirely. It's best to be a bit skeptical, but what you find here will at least give you a place to start. So let's start looking at the evidence.